Well, hello, and welcome back to Orthodoxy in the Isles. I regret to tell you that today I've been unable to take you with me to one of the beautiful holy sites of this wonderful country. But being stuck at the desk, I thought I might take the chance to spend some time talking with you about what this podcast is all about. Now, you'll have gathered already that across numerous episodes, I have been and will be talking about the saints, first and foremost of Wales, and as they connect to Wales. But as time goes on, we will move into England and Scotland and, God willing, Ireland, and perhaps find ourselves traveling across Western Europe. This is no hard task. After all, Western Europe is not a big geographical place, especially from the point of view of somebody who was born in Winnipeg, Canada, and for whom getting to the nearest large international airport entailed at times an 8-hour drive. That said, when it comes to my own background, it presented something of a challenge in the encounter with Orthodoxy. Now, mine is a story that I suspect will resonate with a number of watchers or listeners to this podcast. I am a Westerner. My entire background is Western European. I was born and raised in Canada and find myself now living in Wales. So my experience is limited to this side of the Great Schism, you might say. And what that means is that although having grown up where I did, I was very much conscious of Orthodoxy, for it did represent a significant religious feature on the landscape. When I started to contend seriously with what Orthodoxy was and with the examples of its saints, I had a hard time. And that hard time was not based in anything theological or spiritual. Rather, it was a hard time based on ethnicity. I say that because most of the saints that I encountered, other than, of course, the saints that really are thought of as belonging to the whole church, such as those we call the fathers of the church, when it came to other living examples, their names could be hard to pronounce. Their stories, rooted as they were in, for example, Russia or Greece or the Middle East or North Africa, did not feel immediate. The parish I grew up in Winnipeg, was dedicated to St. Bede. And not far away from us was another parish dedicated to St. Chad. And not much further away than that was a parish dedicated to St. Aidan. And all of these names were names, therefore, that I could take for granted and see as part of my own religious heritage as a Westerner, as a Western European. But what I want to propose is the idea that these saints belong to the Orthodox as much as they belong to anyone. Now, fortunately, iconographers such as Aidan Hart have spent a good deal of time painting their icons and enabling them to live amongst Orthodox parishes, especially here in Great Britain. But it's worth all of us, I think, spending some time reflecting on their lives and getting to know them better so that we might understand our faith to be as much rooted in the Western European experience and the experience of the West more broadly as any other Orthodox name that we might come across. In order to do this, we can turn first to Bede's ecclesiastical history of the English people. Now, I say this not because the ecclesiastical history is the only source for coming to know some of these saints and their stories, but because, first of all, it's profoundly inspiring and one that is so exhaustive, at least as far as the story of faith in these lands goes from an Anglo-Saxon perspective. If Bede has a weakness, it's the fact that he doesn't seem to fully grasp, understand, or sympathize with the British example of faith prior to the Saxon mission. But that notwithstanding, he does touch upon it, and even if it is not something that he fully grasps, understands, or that resonates with him, he at least gives us a toe in the door, so to speak, in terms of encountering these people firsthand. In fact, if I were to say we should read the ecclesiastical history, we would best do so replacing the words Christian or Catholic with Orthodox. Now that could sound quite contentious, and I don't mean in any way to eschew the word Christian, nor do I mean to eschew the word Catholic, but because we're speaking from an Orthodox point of view, to see the other two words used can cause us to pull back. It can cause us to pull back because we don't recognize it as descriptors that properly belong to us. So in order to overcome this, what I would say is approach the text and replace those words with the word Orthodox if it is more helpful. If it causes you to realize that what you are reading are Orthodox stories that belong to the whole church long before the Great Schism of the 11th century. Now, of course, there are theological arguments to be made that the schism started long before 1054, and indeed, I agree with that. But for all intents and purposes, as far as our conversation is concerned, we mark the first millennium as a millennium of relative Christian unity, and should understand the stories of all the saints across that time to belong as much to us as to any of the Western traditions. Pre-conquest history here in Britain, then, is Orthodox Christian history. The conquest, which unfolded from 1066 on, is one that really brought with it a different understanding of church. You might say that the Norman invasion of England heralded a very particular post-Orthodox Christianity that changed the character and landscape of the land. It isn't to say that Christianity in these isles, especially from the time of the Augustinian mission of 597 through to that point, wasn't Latin. It was. But it was, especially in its earlier forms, a Latin tradition that had as much in common with Greek and Orthodox Christianity as certainly as it does with any Latin Christianity such as you experience it today. So I would say that the faith being described in St. Bede's ecclesiastical history is in fact far better reflected by the word orthodoxy than it is by any other term. I alluded to a problem though, and that is the problem Bede had in accounting for fairly of the British tradition or the Celtic tradition prior to the Anglo-Saxon missions. You can see this in terms of how much we know about these saints of these isles as they are identified with Wales compared to what we know about the Saxon saints from the 7th century on. So we have explored so far in this series the story of Christianity in these isles as it began, whether by legend or by empirical history or not, at Glastonbury. And we've drawn that through the Roman story and the names of a great many saints so far, and that will continue. But what is remarkable about the stories, such as we've encountered them so far, is that they seem to stop at some point in the 6th century. We get a blank as far as that story relates specifically to the British people, that is, what today we would call the Welsh, from the mid to late 6th century on. And some of the blame for this might be laid on the shoulders of Bede, however much I love and admire him and what he did for the Christian church. I say that because the British tradition was not his tradition, and he had a particular intention with the ecclesiastical history of telling the story of a church united with the church at Rome. Now, this push towards union with Rome did not really happen until 597 and the arrival of Saint Augustine of Canterbury. This doesn't mean that the Christianity that existed in Britain prior to 597 was somehow separate or different to the faith at Rome. It is to say, though, that it did carry a different character. And it carried the character of something we often call Celtic Christianity, which I see as an unfortunate but almost necessary term in terms of explaining it to the wider world. We can think then of St. Patrick, whose name has already come up in terms of his educational background at Llanelli, but it includes our own St. David here in Wales and has everything to do with the Christianization not only of the British Isles generally, but even as it relates to Western Europe and the recovery of Christianity after the pressure put on the Roman Empire by the Germanic tribes that pushed down on it from the north, really from the 5th century on. What we need, it seems to me, is another ecclesiastical history, one that accounts for the faith of the British Isles generously understood from the time of someone like Bishop Aristobulus through to the 11th century, and for us to understand, first of all, the distinctions that we might attribute to the Celtic tradition, the Celtic church tradition, but also the continuity that runs through from the 1st century to the 11th. Because if we do this, then we will get a much greater picture of just how genuinely Orthodox this faith has been, how truly Orthodoxy belongs both to these isles and to the West more generally. Britain is Orthodox in its origin. The Christian tradition, as it first arrived here, was the tradition carried here directly from the Christian East. It was something that took on forms more natural, perhaps, to people born and raised on windswept, rain-driven islands. But it is a form that looks in many respects like Egyptian Christianity, for example, or Syrian Christianity. And in fact, great work has been done on the artistic links between some of the motifs you might find on the high crosses of the Celtic fringes of these islands, and the jewelry, the insignia of Christianity in Egypt and Syria. There are archaeological links, there are spiritual links, there are theological links. Britain did not depend on the faith's eventual arrival here via Rome by means of Roman imperialism. The faith arrived here independently of that. It arrived here likely through the trade routes that saw Byzantine artifacts arrive on the beaches of Cornwall and South Wales in exchange for Celtic tin. But however it arrived here from a very early point in Christian history. It took on the character of a particularly British Christianity, which included the forms that emerged directly from the Christian East and dovetailed with the landscape and the people who were shaped by the landscape. So that is what Orthodoxy in the Isles is all about. That is the reason we're doing this podcast and this series. We're doing it because of the rich material there upon which all of us Orthodox living in the West can draw. We're doing it because of the breathtaking examples of the saints, and we're doing it so that we might look at history afresh and come to see that not only is it true and correct to speak of orthodoxy in the West, but to come to understand that it was this faith, this Orthodox faith, that would come to save civilization.
Hi, and thanks for watching. Before you go, I have just a couple of housekeeping things I need to share. I am an Orthodox priest with a small but growing parish in Cardiff, Wales. I love what I do, but it is made a lot easier with your support. If you enjoy this series and would like to see more of it, please be sure to like each video and subscribe to the channel. And if you would like to get even more involved, you can go over to my Patreon and sign up for as little as the cost of 2 cups of coffee per month. Members of my Patreon receive notification of all classes I teach, the opportunity to participate in the online Orthodox Theology Club, and the online Orthodox Book Club, a copy of the quarterly Orthodox Exchange magazine in digital form, and for higher levels of support, the same magazine in print. Along with these benefits, your Patreon membership will be supporting Orthodox ministry in Cardiff, in Wales, and beyond. So if you're minded, please go to the link in the description below and become a member today.